The return of Jesus and the rapture of the church. You either love talking about it or you hate talking about it. There is usually no in between, but today on the Then and Now Bible study, we're going to talk about it and going to try not, well, it, clearly subject matter where it might get a little weird, but we're trying not to make it too weird. Stick to scripture. You're going to love it. Let's hit that theme music and intro. All right, welcome back to the Then and Now Bible study. Once again, thank y'all so much for your continued support of the channel. Like, subscribe, all the YouTube things. Last video on this gained a lot of traction, but I figured it would because anytime you start posting about end time stuff, like I said, that's just one of those topics that people love to talk about. So I hope that this one gets a lot of traffic. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the rapture of the church. I'm going to just go ahead and throw it out there. If you didn't watch last week's video, jump back to watch last week's video. Again, as I talk about the rapture of the church, just a disclaimer, I'm not like the typical kind of pre-tribulation dispensationalist. So I've got a little bit of a different stance. And a lot of my stance on the rapture of the church is from what we're going to be talking about in the book of Mark today, the Olivet Discourse. From the book of Mark, from the book of Matthew. They're nearly identical in both of these books. And so that forms a lot of what I believe about the end times, the rapture, what have you. And the reason being is because as you get to the, when we're looking at end times passages, what I try to do is I try to go to the more clear-cut passages of scripture that are talking more like plain speak about this is what's going to happen, and allow the more clear passages of scripture, such as the Olivet Discourse in Matthew and Mark, to speak to, and I translate the obscure end times passages of scripture, such as Revelation, Daniel, some of these, I translate them through the more clear ones. And when you do that, you might land on something different than a pre-tribulation rapture. But this is one of those things, and again, super crucially important. And I think why a lot of people are like really don't like talking about it is because it's definitely down like third tier doctrine that unfortunately a lot of people treat as top tier doctrine. But we can, this is definitely something we can have different opinions on, and it's okay. We can even go to the same church and have a total difference of opinion. And this is one of those doctrines that we can disagree on and be, this is part of studying the Bible. But it's, it's my Bible study. So, you're going to listen to my view on this. How about that? You want to put your view out there, start a YouTube channel. Anyhow, probably half of you already do. All right, let's roll into the scripture. Yeah. So again, we're kind of pulling. We're gonna move through the second half of the Olivet Discourse, and we're gonna jump in verse 14. Is where we're gonna land. It says, "When you see the abomination that causes desolation, standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." And so this is Jesus, once again, Jesus talking. He's talking to his disciples. What has set all this up is that his disciples, they're at the temple, and their disciples make comments about the massiveness of the Herodian temple, the Jewish temple at the time. And it was a big, imposing building. It was huge. But Jesus says to them, he makes a comment that not one stone is going to be left standing on the other stone, and it's going to be destroyed. And so later on, when they leave the city, they're back on the Mount of Olives. the disciples ask him, they're like, hey, what was up with that? How do we know when this is going to happen? And Jesus begins going into what we call the Olivet Discourse. And so this is still the Olivet Discourse. He has talked about the beginning of birth pains. He's talking about wars. He's talking about famines. He's talking about, brother turning on brother during those days. And then he gets into the thing. This is the thing that you really need to be looking for. And whenever you see this thing, let the reader understand what it is. That is the big, huge red flag that to know that this is off and popping. And so what is this? What is the abomination that causes desolation, standing where it does not belong? Let the reader understand. What are we talking about? And it's worded the same exact way in Matthew too. Like basically the Olivet Discourse. I'm going to break my own rule here, because one of the things that I said that I was going to do in this Mark Bible study was to try to stay just in the book of Mark and treat Mark a little bit like an island, but and really kind of look at what is Mark trying to get across whenever he is saying this. But whenever we look at this and we have this like exactly the same way that it is in Matthew, that leads me to believe that Mark's not trying. What Mark is trying to do is say, hey, this is the exact words of Jesus, and from somebody who was there, who heard this, who wrote it down, and I'm putting me and Matthew are putting this down the exact way that Jesus said it, and so Mark is what Mark is trying to do is put down the exact words of Jesus here as an encouragement to those hearing this, and so because of that, the exploration of this is not going to be so much, well, what did Mark mean by this? Why did Mark write it this way? It's going to be this is going to be like one of the times in this Bible study where we're going to kind of go all over the Bible to look at what Jesus is saying and why Jesus is saying it this way. All right, so, and I do believe that anytime, I say that Mark is trying to quote Jesus exactly. I do believe that he is always trying to quote Jesus exactly. But with this particular teaching, this is a long, we'll see segments of the Sermon on the Mount that are broken up and presented in some different ways at different times. But in the Olivet Discourse, it is like formatted the exact same way. And I think that's important too. And that's why Mark puts it that way. So Jesus is saying, hey, when you see this particular thing, the abomination that causes desolation, standing where it doesn't belong, let the reader understand. And so that goes back and that says, hey, you need to have some prior knowledge about what this is talking about. So what this is talking about, the prior knowledge that we need, is actually found in the book of Daniel. And it's Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. And my screen is covering that, so let's get that up there. 25, it says, no one understands this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 70 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with the streets and a trench, but in times of troubles. And after 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death, and will have nothing. The people of the ruler will come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. All right. So this is a phenomenal passage of scripture that I'm not going to give it as much time as what it deserves and what a lot of other people have. But this prophecy about the 77s, it says from the time that Jerusalem is rebuilt. All right. So at this point, Daniel is in captivity in Babylon. Jerusalem has been destroyed. He's saying that Jerusalem will be rebuilt. And from the time that it's rebuilt until the anointed one comes, which is the Messiah, will be 62 sevens. And what's amazing is you can go back and you can do the math on all this, and it lines up perfectly, like to the year, from the time that Jerusalem is rebuilt to the time that Jesus comes. It is exactly the way this is. It's phenomenal. It's amazing. Just like, why do we believe the Bible? Well, we believe the Bible because of this, and then people would swear that the book of Daniel was written after the birth of Jesus was later than, because this is so precise, down to the exact year when Jesus comes is foretold here, where you could have, there should have been no question when the Messiah was coming. Everybody should have known. Everybody in Judea, Jerusalem should have known when the Messiah was coming because of this, because it's so exact. But they had a sweet little cush system where they weren't really looking for him. I think certain people were. I think that's why, you have certain people that knew he was coming, but the vast majority weren't looking. And that kind of, again, when we get to the end of this whole lesson today, it is kind of the thing. They weren't looking for him, because if they were looking for him, they could have done some relatively simple math and found him right here. But it's so precise, it's so exact, down to the year that Jesus is born, that many opponents of the Bible, of Christianity, I guess now it's like 150 years ago, would say that this was written after Christianity, after the birth of Christianity. And then all that changed whenever we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. We found, like, I was out there. I wasn't. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and they were carbon-14 dated to be the book of Daniel, this passage of Scripture is found, and carbon-14 dated to be 200 years older than Jesus. Right. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's wild that we know that this is older than Jesus, and it predicts the year Jesus is born to the T. You can take it from the year that the temple was that Jerusalem was rebuilt to the year that Jesus arrives to the T. It's phenomenal. It's amazing. It cannot be forged. Anyhow, put to death, the anointed one will come. The people of the ruler will come and destroy. Then he'll be put to death, and war will come to continue, and the desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with the many for 7. All right, and so this is what we call the final 7 years, the 7-year tribulation, the 7-year period. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering and the temple. He will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So with this, what we have is we have what's kind of called, we look to this as the guy that's doing this is the Antichrist, and there's the final 7 years of this prophecy, the final 7 years of Israel. And what happens is a ruler makes a peace treaty, and in the middle of that peace treaty, with Israel, he breaks the peace treaty. He sets up basically himself to be worshipped in the temple, and it is an abomination that causes desolation. So how this has been interpreted, probably the way that most of us are used to having this interpreted is a futuristic, like, this is the Antichrist, this is something that's going to happen, in the Great Tribulation. But there's also a preterist interpretation of this, that this is talking about Nero. This is talking about, something that has already happened, and that this happened in 70 AD. And so, what is it? Well, whenever we are coming back to the when we're coming back to the Olivet Discourse. I definitely think that this is talking about Nero. I definitely think that this is like in some sense this is preterist. But as we go on, it's clear that it's not just preterist. It's clear that this is as Jesus is talking about this, I think that he is talking about something that's going to happen within the generation that it's talking about, with that he's talking to. It is going to happen to the disciples in 70 AD. But there's definitely like strong indication that it's going to happen in 70 AD. But there's also strong indication that this is an end times prophecy as well. And so I don't, and there are so many camps when we start talking about this end time prophecy that will go, it's got to be one or the other. But then you look at all the Old Testament prophecy, all the Old Testament prophecy, and we go, oh yeah, no, it's dual fulfillment. There's a near fulfillment and a far fulfillment. And it's funny, like the same guys and girls that will argue, no, it has to be one or the other, will also look at Old Testament prophecy and go, oh yeah, that's clearly a dual fulfillment. That's clearly a near and far. And so I don't have any problem with this being a near and far fulfillment, just like Old Testament prophecy, running in the same vein that basically all Old Testament prophecy runs in, that there's a near fulfillment and then a far fulfillment. I have no problem with that. And I think that's exactly what this is. I think that this is for Jesus talking to his disciples. He's talking about 70 AD. He's talking about Nero. For us, well, he's talking about the end times, or maybe even the great tribulation that we might face in our generation. Who knows? And our generation might be the end times generation. Who knows? So he gives some warning about this. He says, when you see this thing, this abomination that causes desolation, let no one go to the housetop or go down or enter the house or take anything out. Let no one go into the field, get back to get their cloak. How dreadful will it be in the days for those in the days of pregnant women and nursing mothers? Pray that this will not take place in winter, because those days of distress will be unequaled from the beginning, when God created the world until now, never to be equaled again. So again, here in this, there are some preterist clues, and then there are some end time clues. And so it says, let no one go on the housetop or enter and take anything out. So what's interesting in the siege of Jerusalem, when Rome finally does destroy Jerusalem, the Jews are like, no, we're going to hold up in the city and God's going to deliver us like old times. God's going to deliver us. God's going to say, God's not going to allow Rome to sack Jerusalem. Well, the Christians have this, and they're like, Jesus said, go to the hills, not to take anything with you, and peace out. Peace out, J-Town down. They were gone out of there. So, and that's one of the reasons why the core of Christianity survived this. Because the Christians noped out, they were gone because of this, and so when they saw like Rome circling around Jerusalem, they remembered what Jesus said, and so the Jews, it broke the back of Second Temple. I mean, it broke the back of Second Temple Judaism, obviously, because they destroyed the Second Temple, but also, I mean, it just killed so many Jews, it killed so many people. But Christians left Jerusalem and weren't caught up in this. J-Town down. That's so stupid. All right, anyhow. This is why I really do actually need to write scripts, so I don't say stuff like that. But anyhow, yeah, so there's definitely a preterist view here, but there's also a an end times view, because it says, hey, that God created the world until now, and it'll never be equaled again. And there are end times prophecies that talk about a terrible time that will be worse than what they saw in 70 AD. And so clearly Jesus is pointing to this. And something else, some other really interesting stuff is what Jesus is pointing to. He said, hey, this is going to be bad. How dreadful will it be for those in those days who are pregnant and nursing mothers? This goes back to Isaiah. This goes back to these passages of scriptures where during the siege of Jerusalem, during the other sieges of Jerusalem from the Assyrians to Babylonians, where mothers were actually eating, or contemplating eating their children. It is that language that is going back to, hey, it's going to be bad like that. It's going to be really, really bad. So anyhow, you can see the preterist and the end times standpoint from this. Now, verse 20, it says, if the Lord had not cut those days short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, whom he has chosen, he shortened them. So again, you go back to a preteristic view of this and you go, all right, well, the worst persecution of Christians happens right before Constantine. Like, there has never been persecution of Christians worse in history than right before Constantine. And all of a sudden, Constantine comes into power and basically with a stroke of a pen ends persecution of Christians. And then some years later, he actually makes Christianity the official religion of Rome. And so a lot of preterists will look to this and go, okay, this is what he's talking about. He's talking about like those terrible days of that no Christians would have survived that type of persecution, but for the sake of the elect, he shortened them. So, and I agree, but I also think that it's going to be something else, and we'll get into that as well. I also think this is talking about an end times cutting short. Verse 21, at that time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or look, there he is, do not believe him. False messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders, deceives, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I have told you everything ahead of time. So we go back and we look at writings from early church fathers prior to Constantine, and they're definitely false teachers, false prophets, claims to be Jesus. They're out there, and you have early church fathers who are refuting these things. And today you have false prophets, you have false teachers, people who have claimed to be something, John Smith, Muhammad, these false prophets that come forward that deceive many and pull people away from the truth of who God is. And yeah. So again, there's definitely a preteristic view and side of this, and there's definitely and I think the false prophets that we have today are much more, have drawn many, many more away than probably in the early church. I don't know. I don't know the stats on that. But it says, regardless, to be on your guard. All right. So far, if this is all we had, I would be leaning very heavily towards a preteristic view. All right. Like if this is all we had, if it stopped here, I would be like, yeah, this is I'm a preterist. All right. I would definitely think that this is not talking about anything. There's a handful of things like, hey, that might be a little later down the road. But I would lean heavily towards a preteristic view. But then what Jesus says next is one of those things that really kind of pushes me into, all right, yes, there's definitely preteristic. It's definitely talking about 70 AD and kind of the time up to 300 AD, but this is talking about end times. This is talking about when Jesus actually comes back. So verse 24, it says, but in those days following that distress, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its lights. The sun will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. All right. We are now talking about the cosmic sign that accompanies the return of Christ. In verse 26, it says, at that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and glory. All right. So we are talking about now. Oh, I didn't. Here, let me put the screen on. So it says at that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in. Verse 24, but in those days following that distress, the sun will be dark and the moon will not give out its light. Stars will fall from the skies and the heavenly bodies will be shaking. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. So now we have shifted. All right. This is definitely a shift. This is not because Jesus didn't come back in 70 AD. He didn't come back in 300, with Constantine. He is yet to come back. And so now this is clearly talking about something that's going on in the future. Whereas up to this point, I could have said this is mostly talking about stuff that happened in the past. Now you have to go, all right, no, this is something that's going to happen in the future. Jesus didn't come back. Hasn't come back yet. This is talking about his return. And it's talking about the cosmic sign that accompanies his return. All right. And so let's dive into this because this isn't the first place that this cosmic sign is brought up. We go to Isaiah, and actually what Jesus is quoting is here in Isaiah. And in verse 9, it says, see, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger to make the land desolate and to destroy sinners within it. The stars in the heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened and the moon will not give off its light. I will punish the world for evil. I will the wicked for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty and humble the pride of the ruthless. I will make the people scarcer than pure gold, more rare than gold of Ophir. Therefore, I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will shake from its place. The wrath of God Almighty in the day of his burning anger. That's scary. But the marker is the heavenly constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be dark, and the moon will not give off its light. And I will punish the world for its evil, or I will punish, but the moon will not give off its light. This idea of this cosmic sign of the sun and the moon going dark, or the moon turning to blood, or these things. This is this cosmic sign that is it's found all over Old Testament prophecy. That is this marker that this marks the return of Christ. This marks the return of judgment on people. All right, and so we see that in Isaiah. We'll see it here in Joel. And again, the same type of language. That before them the earth shakes, the heavens tremble, the sun and moon are darkened, and the stars no longer shine. The Lord thunders, the head of his army, his forces beyond number, and the mighty army that obeys his command. The days of the Lord are great. It is dreadful. Who can endure it? Again, when we are talking about this day of the Lord and the sun and the moon darkening, we have God marching in on an army, and this didn't happen in 70 AD or 300 AD. There wasn't this army of Christians or army of angels that were marching along with Jesus. So this is clearly something that is in the end times. This is the second coming of Jesus. And so now when we're in Matthew and we start seeing this imagery of the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give off its light, everything, this is like, okay, this is the second coming. And so we'll look at one more thing. I think this is it. This must be it. All right, Revelation. Let's get weird. All right. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. Here we go. The sun turned black like sackcloth. made of goat hair, and the whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth. We'll get to the fig tree here in a second. Figs dropped from the fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up. Every mountain and every island was removed from its place. The kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks and the mountains. They called to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For great is the day of their wrath. For the great day of their wrath has come. Who can withstand it? And so now, back in Revelation, this anchor, this vision, or this image of the sun and the moon going dark, and the skies and the constellations falling from the sky. This is all the same event. This is only going to happen once. You know what I mean? And so this is marking one event, and this is again the return of Christ. And so you would have to go, okay, yeah, I see all the preteristic stuff, but this is clearly talking about the end times. And so now, what else is interesting, and what kind of feeds into my rapture view, is that Jesus has not said anything about a rapture. Like, he's not said anything about anything that could be remotely like the only thing that, like, if we go back and we go, okay, so where's the rapture of the church? Well, all this stuff happens, and he's like, yeah, you see the beginnings of birth pains, yada yada yada, and then we're talking about the abomination that causes desolation. He still is no rapture speak, or anything that we could call rapture speak up to this point, until verse 20. This is the first thing that, like, maybe this might be rapture speak. Had the Lord not cut those days short, no one would have survived. But for the sake of the elect whom he chosen, he shortened them. And so we've already kind of talked about the preterist way of looking at this, which I think is a legitimate way of looking at this. But now we have this, at the beginning of it, it starts off talking about them, and then at the end of it, it's talking about the end times. And so now we go back up, and we're like, all right, let's look at this through the lens of an end times lens. You see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it doesn't belong. Okay, we see the something of a world ruler does something where basically calling for them to be worshipped on a broad scale. And when we go to Book of Revelation, we'll see that there will be other things that accompany this, a miraculous sign that this guy performs, the mark of the beast, whatever that might be. You won't take it accidentally, by the way. That will be the only way that you can buy and sell stuff. There'll be other, these things. When you see the abomination that causes desolation stand where it does not belong, now it starts talking about this great tribulation against, here it was the church. There's been no church. There's been no talk about a rapture of a church. I assume that this is now still talking about the church, that the Antichrist, there will be a literal 7-year end times period. There will be an Antichrist. There will be an end times abomination of desolation. And there will be a tribulation against a persecution of Christians truly like the world has never seen. Like worse than Nero, worse than some of these other guys that back in the 1st and 2nd centuries, that is coming. And that if those days were not cut short, all Christians would be destroyed. Now, how does he cut short those days? Well, at that time, if any, and so it says, during this great tribulation time, if there be false prophets. But in those days, following that distress, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give off its light. So what we have is the the return of Christ. And so how are those days cut short? They're cut short by the return of Christ. They're cut short by following those days of distress. The sun will be darkened. So actually, my highlighting actually works here. My highlighting typically means nothing except for breaks where I can quickly find where I'm at. If the Lord had not cut those days short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, whom he has chosen, he has shortened them. So let's jump back into when he starts talking about what's actually going on. But in those days following that distress, all right, so this is immediate. The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give off his light. Stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. So what he's saying here is like this time of distress that is brought upon by, if we're looking at from like this is going to be in the future, which I think that this is also talking about a future event. This tribulation brought on by the Antichrist against the church, where it talks about for the sake of the elect, that's the church, had it not been cut short. Well, how's it cut short? It's cut short by the return of Jesus. At verse 26. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Now listen to this. And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds and from the four ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. He will gather his elect. So in everything, and people will disagree with me, and that's fine, but in everything in the Olivet Discourse, to me, this is the closest thing to rapture language that I've found, that I can see. In the entire Olivet Discourse, this is the closest thing to rapture language I think is there. And it takes place at the beginning of Jesus's second coming. And we go, as you go and you look at Revelation, and you say, well, what isn't this, post-tribulation? It's pre-wrath is what it is, because when you go back to Revelation, you have the 144,000 sealed, and then you have the great multitude, which is interesting. You have the sixth seal, you have the sealing of 144,000 Jews, and then immediately you have a great multitude in heaven singing salvation belongs to our God. And I could say a multitude that no one could count from every nation, tribe, people, and language standing before the throne and the Lamb. They were wearing white robes, holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and the Lamb, and standing around the thrones. So, for thrones are saying in verse 13, it says, and then one of the elders asked me, these in white robes, who are they? Where did they come from? I answered, sir, you know. And he said, these are those who have come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So what happens, and what's happening here in Revelation, is John sees the cosmic sign, and he sees the return of Christ, and then he tells us about 144,000. That's kind of a side note, but immediately after seeing the cosmic sign that we recognize as the return of Christ, heaven is filled with this great multitude of people from every tribe and nation. And when he says, who are these people? These are the ones that came through the tribulation. So if we go back to Matthew or Mark and Matthew, by the way, you say, following this time of distress, following this time of tribulation, sun and moon, the gathering of the elect. And so in Revelation, what I believe this is talking about is this is the rapture of the church, not from the view of earth, of this bit there being snatched up. This is the view of the rapture of the church from heaven. Like all of a sudden, boom, great multitude appears in heaven, which was the persecuted saints, which were the ones that came through the tribulation. This is this is what I believe is the rapture of the church viewed from heaven. And so then you go into the seventh seal, and this is when the trumpets and the bowls of wrath are poured out. And so this is when Jesus really begins, kind of the other things that it says in the punishment of the Antichrist and the nations, and then his return starts with the gathering of the church, the bowls of wrath, and then it's culminated with that final battle of Armageddon, what have you. All right. This is going to be a long video today, but kind of getting in the weeds a little bit. But anyhow, if you want, let's jump into the fig tree. It says, now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as the twigs get tender and the leaves come out, you will notice summer is near. This is what's interesting. Even so, you see these things happening, you know that it's near and right at your door. I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will not pass away, but my words will never pass away. And so you go, well, all right, now he's talking about this generation will not pass away. You know what I mean? And so is it talking about something that's going to happen then? Or is it talking about, and when he says this generation, is he talking about the church? Well, no, I believe again, we are jumping back and forth between a near fulfillment and a far fulfillment. So Jesus is using language that is clearly talking about. So he starts off talking about stuff, and it seems like he's talking about that generation. He's talking about 70 AD. Then he starts talking about stuff. He goes, no, okay. He's talking about something that's going to happen way in the future, and it's going to be something later on. And now he's coming back and he's going, no, it's this generation. And so again, it's just that alternating between the near and far fulfillments of this prophecy. Jesus is saying, who is this for? Is this for the disciples, something that's going to happen in their lifetime, or the church later down the year? And Jesus is like, yes, it's going to be both. And I believe here it says that this generation will not pass away. Well, what generation is he talking about? Every generation that reads this, that's what generation he's talking about. Because again, like last week we talked about that I have kind of a historic view of this as well, where I feel like I believe, I don't like saying I feel like, I believe that as we look through history, we see versions of the book of Revelation and these end times, parallels of this happening in every generation. Every generation faces this in some form. Clearly not in the way that the first century did it, not the way that the end times are going to face it, but in some form, every generation faces this. So what generation is he talking about? Every generation. I believe that what he's saying here is that every generation is going to face their tribulation. Every generation of Christian, somewhere in the world, there'll be Christians facing this. So he talks about the fig tree, and Revelation brings up the fig tree as well. The figs falling off the fig tree. But he says, listen, you can know the season. You can look around. You know that whenever you take this lesson from the fig tree, you know that whenever they get tender and the leaves are out, summer's coming. Okay, so he's like, listen, you should know when the season is getting near. Like, things should become obvious. All right. And again, I think this is what saved Christians in 70 AD. Whenever they saw, Jerusalem about to get sacked, they took off. But also, this is for us too, because now we get into something that's clearly end times. And he says, but about that day and hour, no one knows, not even the heavens and angel, nor the Son, only the Father. He says the exact day and hour, nobody knows. Now, the season, you can go. So for us, and having a pre-wrath view, you can go whenever I start seeing certain things happening. I start seeing an abomination of desolation. I start seeing, these end time things kind of hard, like we need to be paying attention to this stuff. I can know that the season is coming. I won't know the day or hour. So you just persevere. You hold, you have to be on guard, be alert. You do not know when this time will come. And it's like a man going away. He leaves the house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task. And he tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What will I say to you? I say to everyone, watch. And that's so that's the application. Regardless to your view on the end times, the application is the same. Watch. Don't let Jesus come back and catch you slipping. Don't think I've got time where I can get my life together, or I can do when I retire, I'm going to be a missionary. One day I'm going to do this or what? No. Keep the master's house in order. If he comes back and he's, and basically what he's saying is like, you leave the servants in charge and he comes back and his house is a mess, he's going to be mad. So, and you don't know when he's going to come back. So you need to keep his house straight the entire time. Like it needs to be, everything needs to be right. And so that is for us as the church, no matter what generation it is, that we need to be operating like Jesus is coming back. Like the end times are about to start popping off, and we need to have an urgency about us. And we need to make sure that, and I do believe that the season will be able to tell, but the exact day we're not going to be able to tell. And I believe that we need to make sure that we're looking out for these things. We don't need to stick our heads in the dirt. We don't need to be obsessed with it, but it needs to be. I mean, there's a lot of Christian, and I started this video off by saying this: you either love talking about this or you hate talking about it. And I think there are people that kind of get overly obsessed with this topic, and I think there are people that completely ignore this topic. And for a Christian, I think that we need to kind of come to the middle of that, where we need to watch and we need to be aware. We need to know what's going on in the world around us. We need to know what prophecy says, and we need to have a good understanding of this. But we don't need to dwell on it. This can't drive all of our theological discussions. But we need to be aware of it, and we need to conduct ourselves with the hope that Jesus is coming back. And when I say the hope, but the knowledge that Jesus is coming back, and that gives us hope is what I mean to say. With the hope, the fact that Jesus is coming back gives us hope to know that all things are going to be made right, but also a healthy respect that when he comes back, he's going to expect the church to be in order, and we need to make sure that that's that. Oh, let's see. That's not too bad. 50 minute video. That's not too terrible. I actually thought it was going to be longer. Anyhow, dived into a lot of deep stuff. If you are interested in the pre-wrath rapture view, recommend a book, and it's probably going to this Alan Kirshner, Antichrist in the Day of the Lord. Really good book. If you're interested in more of that pre-wrath rapture view, he really kind of goes through the Olivet Discourse, Revelation, Daniel, Joel, Zechariah, digs into that a lot. Good stuff. But anyhow, we're through the Olivet Discourse. We're going to be jumping into some other like less weird stuff next week. But man, hope y'all have a great week, and we'll see y'all next week. And I love what Dan said Sunday, that Thursday-ish, because this video it's Friday, and so this is definitely going to be a Thursday-ish video. And I apologize about that, but things happen. All right, and here comes that theme music to get us out of here.